Hey, thanks for tuning in. We got a long day ahead of us. Behind me is a 2013 Dodge Grand Caravan with the 5-star engine, the Pentastar. We're going to be replacing the rocker arms. A very common issue on these, especially this generation, is that those roller followers, the rocker arms, I believe Dodge calls them the cam valve, the bearings inside start to wear out. You get a ticking noise. I'll let you hear it so then you understand what the ticking noise is. But in this video, we're going to be replacing every single one. There's 24 of them, so it'll involve pulling the cams off, changing them out, putting the cams back on. So this will be a really intensive job. 7.5 hours according to the book. It may take us a little less, may take us a little more, but somewhere in that ballpark. Let's get started. We're going to start by disconnecting the battery, possibly. All right, now we want to get the manifold off, the intake manifold. Pull the air box. This PCV hose comes off on this side or up here at the box, doesn't matter. Now the flathead screwdriver, we can pull it off here or right here, whichever one's easiest to get to. We'll go for this one down here. There we go. Now you don't necessarily have to disconnect this from this resonator box. I just find it easier, but it's not necessary. This resonator and this duct and filter housing can all come off as a unit. Right here, there's a little tab we can get with a screwdriver, flathead, and pop it up. Once I get it off, I'll show you. Let me get a different tool. I'm gonna use one of these. There we go. So it's just one of these. That top pops up. So that's what you're trying to do, is pop that off, and then this little holder, this little clip comes out. Then that separates this, and then we have this plug here. Now this has been off before. This is my first time working on this vehicle, but it has definitely been off. This is cracked or broken right here. So just something to note. I'm not calling anybody out, just saying that this has been removed. Okay, so now let's pull this off. There's these connectors we can pull off. Now there are red tabs that you have to push back, and then you can pinch and pull it off. So having a pick or a little flathead screwdriver can help with those tabs. And then once they're pushed back, and you just pinch on the connector and it comes off. And this harness can just pop off like that, come up like that. This hose we can just unplug off the top. So we're just freeing all this stuff from the manifold. And then there's this brake booster hose too that can pop off. Comes off pretty easy actually. All right, now on this side there's a bracket, but there's two 10mm bolts directly holding this on. They're actually just nuts that come off, two 10 mils. And then this bracket back here, there's a 13 mil down below that we can get. And that'll pull this little bracket out of the way. Two 10mm nuts on the front, and then the manifold, well, we get these main bolts out. The manifold will come up and in and out. Hopefully that makes sense, but I'll show you as I do it. These two 10 mils come off really nice with a ratcheting wrench. Oh, and one of those 10 mils is already missing. Makes our job easier. We only have one 10 mil to remove, but ratcheting wrench works really well. And then the 13 deep socket. What's nice about these Caravans and the Chrysler Town & Countries is there's a lot of room to work with. Let me pull this bracket off and show you. So there's a little harness connected to it, but let me pull you around one more time and then show you that bracket. And that's the bracket that came off. So there's that 10 mil slot here, 10 mil slot here, and that 13 down below. Now we don't have to pull it completely out. So this side is free. Now we'll come to the front, and under here, pull this back, or up, I mean. There we go. There are, let's see, right there, and on this side, right there, are two more 10mm nuts. We'll get with a ratcheting wrench. So ratcheting wrench, one nut, two nuts. Now we'll get these, I believe they're an 8 mil, yes, 8mm, and you want to use a 1/4 inch extension, especially to get into these ones here, because you want a 1/4 inch 8mm, not a 3/8. 3/8 is just a little too fat. So there are 7 altogether. This should be ready to pop up and out. There we go. Now we have this hose here that we can pop off either from there or it can come off back here, whatever's easiest. Get a screwdriver and just pop on this thing. There we go. There. That should be it. Harness is out of the way. There we go. So now I want to take rags and cover over our intake ports so nothing falls down inside. Now you can inspect your intake manifold gasket. If there's a nice rise to it above the plastic and they're still really good and flexible, you can reuse them. But if they look flat, old, crusty, then we'll want to replace them. All right, we're making good progress. Now we'll take the ignition coils out and remove the spark plugs. These are getting new spark plugs when we put it all back together. Pulling the spark plugs out just helps rotate the engine just a little easier. We'll have to make sure that we're at top dead center on a particular cylinder. So just having those out will help big time in rotating the engine. 10 millimeter holds the coils on. Before I move on, I'm gonna put all these nuts and bolts with the intake. All right, coils. A good twist and a pull is all you need. All right, we got the spark plugs out too. And kind of the same idea. We're gonna be working around this area. We don't wanna drop anything in here on accident. So we're just gonna take a little bit of rag, pop it in each spark plug tube. Make sure there's enough rag still poking out of it so you can grab it and pull it back out. That way we keep the inside of the engine nice and clean, and dust and all that junk doesn't get dropped in there, or a bolt. That'd be the worst case scenario. All right, just for better access and better filming, I took the airbox off. The power steering fluid reservoir just has one nut holding it on, and then the box is just held in with grommet, so it just pops off. There's no bolts that need to be removed, and then that's out of the way. And then that also allows us to move this around and be a little more free with it. So right here, variable valve timing solenoids, and then there's 2 on this back side as well. What we want to do is mark on them with a marker. Let's unplug them real quick. We want to mark on them I for intake and E for exhaust, and we want to keep them where they are. So if we're doing this front bank, we want to make sure that these go back with the front bank. If we're doing the rear bank, we want to make sure that those go back with the rear bank, and mark them intake and exhaust, because they can, according to the manual, be swappable, and it'll mess up your timing. So now we can pull these out. It looks like a Torx. So I have a T25. It should slide out. All right, there we go. And again, these seals can be reused if they're in good shape. All right. I believe our valve cover gasket kit comes with these seals, but you know, if they're really malleable and they don't look squashed or hardened, go ahead and reuse them if you so choose. But replace them if you got them. How I'm gonna drain the coolant is just pull the thermostat housing off, let it drain that way. If you're saving your serpentine belt, you wanna pull that off first. Jack the vehicle up on this passenger side, pull the tire off. There's a little plastic cover. I believe there's 3 fasteners that hold it on, and you get access to the belt tensioner. Really easy once you pull that tire off and get that plastic cover out of the way. Then pull your belt off, come back up and do this. This is getting a new serpentine belt as well, and a new thermostat. So we're just gonna let it all fall down, and we'll clean it up after. 2 10 millimeter bolts. Crack it loose, let it drain. Let it drain faster, you can pull off your radiator cap. And I'll pull it off up here at the radiator. I don't think you can see it with the camera angle, but just pulling this top hose off is all. Now that the hose is out of the way, we want to take these brackets off here. That way we can get to the bolt underneath it for the valve cover. Ratcheting wrench again, kind of a tight little spot, but if you have a ratcheting wrench set, it'll save you a lot of hassle. All right, there's one, and I don't think it has to come out all the way, but this bracket here, I think it can just be tucked out of the way. Just as long as you have access to all your valve cover bolts. I'm gonna see if we can't leave this other one. See what happens. So then, 10 millimeter bolts, let's pull our harness off here. Get it with a screwdriver. There we go. And then down below here's another spot for your harness. That comes off pretty easy. Looks like there's 2 spots down here. There we go. And that's out of the way. This is all out of the way. I'm gonna unplug the injectors. May not have to, but I think it'll give us more room with our harness here. And then pop this off the valve cover. There we go. Can lay out of the way. We'll pop this off, our cam position sensor. This comes off, so okay, so there's a harness on this end that needs to pop off out of its spot. There we go, that wasn't hard. All right, now it looks like a series of 10 mils. Nope. Series of 8 mils. There we go. Before we pull this up, let's take our cam position sensor out. T30. Now we can pull it out. There we go. Should pull out pretty easily. This big fat ring, that stays in, that's not part of it. This fits inside, so it may look like it's this whole ring, but it's not. It's the smaller ring in the middle. All right, double check, make sure we got everything. Let me get a rubber mallet and we'll tap on it. Rubber mallet. Okay, we're missing something. It's not coming loose. So just looking at, I think I got everything. I don't know why this thing's just being stubborn. There we go. There we go. You just get nervous. You don't want to break this plastic stuff. Okay, so this bracket does have to be removed. I was hoping we'd get away with it, but doesn't look like it. So 13 mil, a very awkward spot. Let's see, what would it take to pull this cooling fan? Honestly, it looks like it just locks into place. I think it would be pretty easy to pull out. So let's do that. Let's just do it the way they want us to. So we got these connectors on the fan. And we got this overflow reservoir, just the hose. And then there's a tab on the top here, and the tab on the top here. I believe it just slides out. There we go. That wasn't altogether too bad. All of that just to get to this bolt. If you can find a way to get to the bolt without doing that, I'd say do it. But if you can't, then that's what you do. I wonder if we can just, there we go. Just, you don't have to pull that stud all the way out, just loose so this can get moved out of the way. Now this should come up and out more freely. There we go. All right, now we can wipe off our surface really well. If there's a lot of dust and dirt, you can go ahead and vacuum it first. And this one's not too bad. And then when you wipe, you want to wipe from the inside out. Just get that surface nice and clean. That'll help prevent any of that stuff getting accidentally knocked into the engine. And then our surface will be ready for our new valve cover gasket when we're putting all that back together. Kind of a twofold step here. All right, and then we want to knock off this silicone where the head and the timing cover meet, because we'll be applying a new thing of silicone there. So let me show you what happens. I was thinking about it and was like, oh, I didn't have you listen to it before I started pulling things apart. Got excited and forgot that step of it. But if you notice, these are what we're replacing. Right underneath the cam lobes is a roller follower or rocker arm. If you notice, this lobe is up, so the short side of the lobe is touching the roller and you can't move it. Same with this one, can't move it. This one here, you can't move it. Well, this one is an issue. Look what I can do. See that? So that's what's causing our noise, and that's what's causing our issue. And what can happen is it'll chew up our cam. Our cam lobes will get really chewed up. I recommend a new camshaft. Now for our camshaft timing. On the variable valve timing gear, there are arrows. Those arrows need to be pointing in towards each other, and then across from that arrow is a line. That line is just parallel on the outside to here. But the most important is these arrows are facing each other, and then the chain links. So there are 12 from this notch here to this notch here. There are 12 chain pins in between. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Let me shift you to the back side. There is a triangle. Hopefully you can see it, and a circle. So a triangle on this back side, a circle on this back side, and again, 12 pins in between. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 in between those two. So that is set the way we want it. And when we put it all back together, we want that same 12 in between and those same arrows in the front to match. This is the technical part, because if we do it wrong and something happens, we have to pull the whole timing cover off and set the timing down by the crank. Special tool. All these tools will be linked in the description below. In the tool, there is a specific left and a right. So we're working on the left here. And how do you know the left and the right? Well, the front of the engine with the belts and the crank, it's your right hand, left hand. So we'll put our cam lock tool in. Want to tap it in a little. .36mm. We'll bust these nuts loose. We just want to crack them loose. Okay, one. Now we'll take our tool out, our cam lock tool. It's going to be a little tricky to show, but in the toolkit there comes a little wire with a hook on it, and then this little bone-shaped tool. The chain on the intake side on this front or the left bank, you'll see a flat-headed screw kind of recessed in a little metal housing. I'll pull you around and show you. On the top you'll see a hole. On the same side that the hole is in, you'll need a flashlight to look down there, but this tool needs to slide down and that angled piece will fit in that hole on the side. Now you can pull up. And you'll see that where that screw is, that flathead screw head, you'll see little like oil come out just ever so slightly. You'll notice a difference when you pull up. That's relieving tension or relieving the lock on the chain tensioner. Then with this tool, so we want to pull up on this. While that's pulled up, on this tool we want to snake it in just like this. Hopefully you can see in this direction. Snake it in and push on that timing chain guide, just like that. And it'll lock the guide and the chain in place. So now the chain, when we remove these, cam phasers won't fall down because it's being locked in by this. Let me pull you around and show you. You see right there, that's the screw head, and then off to the side is that hole. It's on that same side down below, there's another hole in the side of that metal piece. That's the tensioner release. And then this just gets shoved in there against the chain, and it pushes back that guide and locks it all in. Now we can finish pulling off these, and we don't have to pull them completely out of the vehicle. We want to keep the exhaust with the exhaust, the intake with the intake. So for ease of installation, I'm just wiping any oil off of the chain in that one spot. I'm going to mark the 2 chain sprocket pins that straddle over this little channel. I'm going to do the same to this one over here. I'm going to do the back side as well. That way if anything happens, I know where they should go. So I'm going to pull these off. Pull this one off. It should slide off. Not too challenging. There we go. And just to keep everything where we like it, I'm going to put that tool right back in just to keep them spread apart and everything kind of semi-taut. Doesn't have to be perfect, But that tool is gonna hold everything kind of in place, so I don't have to worry about the chain dropping on either side, and it's just gonna hold it there for me. Now we can work on removing the cams, just to show you how we have it. So these are loose and free from the cams, but they're still in time with each other because we have this in place, and then this won't fall down where this one is, and we don't have to worry about too much slack on that chain and things skipping on us. So now we'll get these. I believe they're a T30 or 27. Let me get that torque for you, and then we'll bust those loose, pull the cams out. They are a T30. We want to start with the one closest to the phaser and get something else to break these loose. And then 2 over. And then back one. And then the last. Now there's caution about getting these wheels for the cam timing too close to anything magnetic, so we'll keep these away from our magnets. We want to make sure that we keep our caps as they came off in that same order. Here we go. So this is the intake, this is the exhaust. See if you can notice the difference. It's actually, it's really obvious. So it's right here. That's the bad one. It looks like all the bearings, maybe hard to see in there. It looks like they all spun and now they're on one side. And you can see right there on the sides of these where the cam was hitting. And then notice on the cam here, you see how it chewed both sides of that. Well, that is a real bummer. We're gonna go ahead and order that. I have to call the dealer, see if we have it in stock in town. If not, then we'll have to order it. What I'm gonna do in the meantime is pull that back bank off, the right bank, and then we wanna see if there's any other roller followers or rocker arms on that back bank that are doing the same thing. If they are, we may need more than one cam. Kind of interesting or unfortunate, the customer said they only heard this noise start maybe 2 months ago at most. So it hasn't been running like this for very long, but long enough to cause some damage. So that's maybe a warning out there. If you start hearing this noise, take care of it as soon as possible, because these cams are a couple $100. So let me go ahead and do that. I'll do that off camera because the process is exactly the same as this bank here. So I'll do it off camera real quick, and then I'll show you whether or not any of those roller followers have done the same thing or something similar, and then we'll take a peek at those cams as well. So we got the valve cover off on this side, and the only difference getting the valve cover off is that there's this PCV connector on this end. We want to take that off of the valve cover, otherwise it won't come up. It'll hang up on this cam here. Other than that, the wiring harness in the back is just held on with these. I think there's 4 or 5 of them, so you just take a screwdriver, pry it up, the harness gets out of the way, and then you just pull the bolt and it should come up. Now the cam timing, if you timed the front, if we're still in time on the front, you should automatically be in time on the back. Let me grab my flashlight and show you. The difference between the front and the back is that they're opposite. Can't really get a good angle. But what I mean by opposite is that the arrows don't point towards each other, they point away from each other, and the lines point towards each other. Whereas on this side, the arrows pointed towards each other, lines pointed away. It's just the opposite on this. But the amount of links in between this groove and this groove is still 12 pin links, or the triangle and the circle at 12 pin links. So that's all the same. So just like the front, we want to lock it this time with the right side. I'll just put that in, lock it in place. I don't really have the room here because of that thing. In order to get the back intake phaser nut off, we're gonna jack the engine up. We'll pull this motor mount. Just these 2 bolts. And there's a little ground strap that you can pull off of the frame. We'll jack it up. We can't jack it up too much because we got this front mount and that back mount. Pull this off. Then behind it, there's a 13 millimeter, bolting it onto the frame. Pull that off, and that'll get it to move. We don't have to move a lot. just enough. So the combination of jacking the engine up and moving this out of the way, there we go. That's all we need. All right, now that those are cracked loose, we can pop our tool out. So now we want this one with the little channel in it, and it should have a number, 10369. That channel goes in this direction, so it's smooth facing the crank pulley and all of that. Groove is towards the transmission. Then we'll slide it in right between the two, and you want the tip of it to go towards the exhaust cam, and you'll feel it. It'll fit right in a nice little groove slot. Then with a pair of vice grips or a wrench, this is 1 1/8, you take the exhaust cam and you move it clockwise. While you're pushing down on this, ever so slowly. There we go, until it bottoms out, and then it's locked in place. So just like in the front, what I'm gonna do is mark the chain in those two spots. I'm gonna do the same thing and throw the tool back in here. Now they're free of the cams, and then we, just like the front, we'll pop these caps off, pull the cams out, and the rockers are right there. You can see how this tool goes right down in between, but it favors the exhaust side. And then as you turn the cam clockwise, you'll feel this start to give and go in place. And then I just have that tool in there holding it all together so these don't slide around and slip, and we're off the cam. So that's it. All right, so check this out. This is the intake. That's the exhaust. And when they told me it had a tick and I went to look at it, I thought it was this rear bank. But when we pulled off the front and I saw the exhaust was just chewed up, and that definitely was bad, I thought, oh man, I was totally off on my diagnosis. But check this out. See how this is starting to do the same thing? And this right here is starting to eat away on the sides there. And then let me show you how much it moves. See that? So I bet this was the noise, and the one on the exhaust on the front bank or the left bank was probably no longer making a noise. It probably had made a noise at one point, but it ground down so much and ate the metal away so much that I bet this rocker was never actually being actuated anymore. So right now, while I'm waiting for a reply to see whether we're going to order them online or get them locally, I started putting the rocker arms back in, the new ones in. Let me show you. So the new ones, we just want to give them a nice oil bath, roll them around, flip them over, roll them around until they're good and oiled up. So the needle bearings are nice and lubed so they're not dry when we first crank over the car. Then on the car, it's just really simple. You just lay them on top of where they go. The fat end goes on the hydraulic lifter, the other end goes on the valve stem, and just make sure they line up so that it is getting on the valve stem like it's supposed to. But quick and easy. That's it, all 24, just make sure they're in their spots. And I'm gonna put the good cams back on. Then we can pour a little bit of oil over where the cam caps go for a similar reason, so it's not dry when we start it. So that's over the cam caps, and then we'll pour a little over the lobes. I'm gonna make sure the cam caps underneath are good and clean. So now the tightening sequence goes here, and then all the way to the end, then in, and then the big cap last. Having it go down even. Do one bolt, then the other, back and forth. Let me get a torque spec on those. These are torqued to 89 inch-pounds. Now we'll set in this one in the rear. Make sure all those rockers are good. Because these are aluminum heads, you just want to be sure you have a few good threads in there before using any power tools. And know your tools, because 89 inch-pounds isn't that much. This thing will torque things down to about 15, between 12 and 15. So I don't want to just hammer it down with this. When I come to the end and I know it's about to seat, I let off the trigger. Otherwise, you run the risk of over torquing and stripping out your head. So that is all I can do today. So, to be continued. Took a couple days for parts to get here, but we are back in action. Brand new camshafts, got 2 of them, and they are stamped. If you wonder, like you buy 2 of them and you forget, oh, which one is which, they're stamped. This says RI on it, so that's right intake. The other one says LE for left exhaust. So they are stamped. If you accidentally get them mixed up, there you go. All right, well, I think we have all of the rockers already set in place, so we're ready to slap these in and put it all back together. So even though these are new, we still want to wipe them off really good. Anywhere that's going to be rubbing on something, just in case there's anything left over from the factory, we don't want it scoring up anything. Just wipe it off, all our lobes, and all right. So this is RI, goes back here. Then we're gonna drizzle a little oil on it before we put the caps on. And we kept the caps in their order. 89 inch-pounds. Do the exact same for this left exhaust. And then just in case you forget as well, this little drill hole, that points up. So then you don't get it 180 or a little off. Just points straight up. Oil. I got a little oil on the exhaust. That's gonna stink for a little bit. So now, before we put our timing on, we'll just take a flashlight and double check our rocker arms. Give them a wiggle, just make sure they're still in place. They shouldn't really move at all, at least up and down. Now where the end of them is resting on the valve, that may be able to move side to side just a smidge, but there should definitely be no up and down play in them. Check all of them, make sure they're lined up and accounted for as well. Same back here. Now let's start putting our timing back on. When putting our cam phasers back on the front of the cam, there's a little notch right there. That'll fit into a keyway on the phaser, and then there's a dot right there on top, and there's a dot on the back of the phaser. So you should be able to just line it up dot to dot. Just connect the dots. If you need to move the cam, this is a 1 1/8, has been working. It's the biggest wrench I have. They give you a little spot here for a wrench. I don't see why you couldn't use a pair of vice grips. Just clamp on where this spot is they have specially made for you. This exhaust right here will need to be moved to line this up. So let's line the intake up, and it should be pretty easy. Pull this out. There, that was it. Really easy. And we want to make sure the bolt that came out of it is the one that goes right back in it. So when we pulled it all apart, we put it in a specific order on our table so we knew how to put it back together. Slap that on. Perfect, just snug for now. Now this one, let me move you so you can see a little better. I'd like you to see what I'm doing. So this cam's dot is way down here because as I was tightening the cam, it rotated a little. And then this dot is more up, higher. So we'll just rotate the cam in that direction to get that dot more lined up. And then we'll just slide this on. Needs a little more. Okay, that was too much. Back it off a little. Back it off just a little. There we go. Now it's slid on, and that's that. And you can tell it's locked in because when you move the cam a little, the phaser automatically wants to move too. So that one's in. Put this bolt in. You can see our dots are lined up. Dots are lined up. Then we want to just double check that we have the 12 on the back from the triangle to the circle. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now we will turn the crank a couple of turns and just make sure we still have 12 there. But the initial timing setup, and then the same if you want to use this instead, there should be 12 in between. So our initial timing setup on this side is still good from the factory. So we didn't accidentally skip anything, at least between these two. When we turn the crank, we'll know whether the crank tooth got off. But with this tool done right, we shouldn't have any issues. So now I'm gonna hop onto the back and just do that off camera. It's the exact same way as we did this. Let's just do the back together. So this now can come out. So you can just take that tool out of the front. Take this little wedge piece out, Put in this top one. Looks good. All right, and then last one in the back. And perfect, slid right on. All right, so we should be able to pull this one out. Oh, it's not wanting to come out for some reason. Let me turn the cam. There we go. So just how we put it in, we had to move the cam clockwise a little. That's what it took to pull it back out as well. You don't want that to break in there. So if it's not coming out, don't pry and pull on it, because if that breaks down in there, it'll be a bad day. All right, let's get these torqued down. We'll put our tools back in to lock the cams. For the oil control valves, I have 118 foot-pounds. Let's do this far back one first, because that one by the AC is gonna be a pain. They're both kind of a pain. Let me go over like this. Okay, last one. This is the worst. Let me see if jacking up the engine is the trick. I didn't think it actually helped, but maybe it did. So let me jack it up just a little. That might change my angle. Yeah, so it did. So it is a combination of jacking it up and then moving this out of the way, because that actually helped a lot. Alrighty. Sweet. Pull these out. We are done with these tools. Let's rotate the engine twice, so 2 crank revolutions equals 1 cam revolution, and we'll double check our timing marks. I think the hardest part about filming is knowing whether or not you're recording. So I thought I was recording. I went through the whole 2 revolutions of the crank, 1 revolution of the cam. I recounted. We are 12 notches, just like we should be. Our arrows line up. Over there, we are 12 little links like we should be, and our lines match up. So we're good to go. Also, before turning the crankshaft, I lubed up the lobes. I just poured a little oil on each cam lobe before turning the crank, because these were dry. So now what we want to do, we're getting ready to put our valve covers back on. Plastic scraper, we want to get off any of that RTV that may be right where the head and the timing cover meet. There's a little crease. We'll want to reapply RTV in those creases before putting the valve cover on. We want to take off the old RTV as much as we can with a plastic scraper. You don't want to use metal. You don't want to gouge the head at all, or these surfaces. It comes off pretty easy. You don't have to get 100%, just 99% is good enough. Back was a little harder to see. You may be able to just kind of feel it back there. Get off what you can. All right, feels good. We got new valve cover gaskets and new spark plug seals. So this is how we're gonna change the spark plug seals. Take a screwdriver and you just put it on the side of it, and they should pop right out. Very little effort, and they just pop out. So this is the trick I use for getting the seals back in. The same socket you used for the cam phaser. If you notice, the top of the valve cover will have the spark plug holes and then ridges on either side. Those are reinforcement ridges. Your socket will be just the perfect size to span over the top of both of those. We'll flip it over. So that's on this side what you want to use as a backing, as a support. So let's just set that aside for now. On your new seal, you put a little silicone paste. Doesn't take a lot, just a little lubricant on the outside of it. Just rub it around. This will just help with insertion, and we'll set it in. So just set that there over the top. Then you have another socket, the exact same size. This is 1 1/8 inch. That'll just fit right over the top of that seal, and you tap it in. And you just want to double check it. You can flip it over and see if it's seated all the way. Like this one can go in just a smidge more. Doesn't take a lot of force. And it'll bottom out. And there we go. That should come out. We want to pick off any of that silicone that's on the plastic cover too. Get that off. So it should only go on one way. You're just pressing it in. All the way around. There we go. Perfect. So that's it, ready to go on. We'll go ahead and do our other one as well so we have both of them ready. Now that we know we're not gonna have to crank the engine over by hand anymore, we can go ahead and put our new plugs in. Champion is the OEM brand for this, so that's what we're putting in it. Torque on the spark plugs is 13 foot-pounds. I'm gonna clean up where we're putting the RTV one more time. I didn't put my RTV away correctly, so it's hard at the tip. I can't get anything out, so I just punctured it in the middle. I'm gonna squeeze a little out. Doesn't take a lot, just a good little drop. Put that on. And the one in the back is hard to see, so I'm just gonna use a mirror. Let me show you what it looks like. Right there, so it doesn't take a crazy amount. I put maybe a little too much there, but that's okay. When you put the gasket on, it'll squish out either side. We want to make sure our rubber is clean too, where the RTV is going to make contact, and that's where these little square cutout is. That's where it's going to touch. So just make sure that that rubber is nice and clean too. And then we can put it on. Move stuff out of the way as needed. Move that out of the way. There we go. Perfect. Line it over our spark plug wells. Looks good. You can push down to get them started over our spark plug wells. And you can even put a little silicone paste inside the rubber on that spark plug well seal. Just a little silicone paste as a lubricant so it slides over those wells really good. And we'll get a few of these bolts started. In fact, we can get all of them started. And then we'll go tighten them down. Now the sequence is middle to outside. And these are 106 inch-pounds, which isn't very much. We'll put our cam position sensor back in so nothing falls in the valve cover. Now this pink seal on top of the bolt, we want to just put a little silicone paste, a little lubricant in there. Put that in. Snug that down. Perfect. Let's go ahead and put our back cover on. That way our RTV doesn't sit too long. And with the mirror, we just want to go in the back and just make sure that nothing's caught underneath, like a wire or anything like that. Now on the back, we have that PCV little thingy mabob. So we want to check that seal. If that seal looks good, then we can reuse it. If not, then we'll want to replace it. Kind of tedious getting those bolts back in, but you got them. And just snug is good. You don't have to be crazy tight. Man, that was a butt. All right, got it in, got that in. Now let's put our ends in on this side. I'm gonna reposition you a little. If your gasket is stuck on the little valve, you just wanna pull it off. And there's a groove on the valve cover that we wanna just tap it in that groove. We'll clean it off really well. Don't spray it with brake cleaner or anything, otherwise it'll swell up and it won't fit back in the groove. If they don't look good or you think they should be replaced, then go ahead and get some new ones. And make sure it's completely seated in, otherwise you'll get an oil leak. All right, there we go. We'll wipe these off too, right where that seal is gonna mate, just so there's no grit or anything that'll cause a leak. And then we mark these, so this is intake, and I also marked it front and rear, so this is intake rear. All right, that is pretty much the technical stuff. Those oil control valves that go on the valve cover, just good and snug. There's a torque spec, but it's not very much, so good and snug, you'll be fine. Other than that, I'm just gonna button everything back up. The torque spec on the intake manifold is 7.5 foot-pounds, and then starting from the middle, work your way out on that for the pattern. All the harnesses, just make sure everything's plugged in and connected. We're gonna do a thermostat on this, and the serpentine belt. Those are pretty self-explanatory. So everything else from this point on will just be high-speed time-lapsed. So enjoy the music. Everything is all back together. We got the battery connected back up. I did not fill it up with coolant yet. We just want to make sure that it'll start and everything's good. If we have to pull anything back apart, then we don't want to have to re-drain the coolant. So let me go inside. Let me show you how to do it, because we want to prime the whole system and get oil all up in the head and on the cam lobes before firing it up and raising the RPM to 1500. You want to get that oil circulating at a lower RPM. In the vehicle, you want to push the gas pedal all the way to the floor. That'll put it in what's called clear flood mode. It'll turn the injectors off and it won't fire. Then we want to just crank the engine. And then we'll do that one more time. We also don't hear any engine mechanical or anything crazy like that. The cadence or the rhythm of the cylinders sound really good. So now let's fire it up. And there we go. No misfires. Sounds good. Ticking's gone. Perfect. All right, that is the completion. I'm gonna go ahead and do an oil change and fill it up with coolant. When putting it back together, some things to note. First is the cooling fan goes in a lot better if you pull that dipstick tube out. Probably pulling the fan out would have been better, having that dipstick tube removed. So it's just one bolt, one 13mm bolt, and you wiggle it out of its hole. Putting it back in, put a little silicone paste or lubricant around it, around the O-ring, for sliding it back in. And then you don't damage that O-ring and have an oil leak at that location. Really easy to see just with a flashlight. You can look down there and find the hole and poke it in. So no big deal there. Also, your wire looms, the routing of all your wiring is important, because you don't want things to rub on anything and then over time cause a electrical issue that wasn't there before. So just something to keep in mind. I had to pull the harness by the cooling fan I plugged it in and then it didn't look right, so I pulled it back off and had to reroute it a different way. So you could take pictures of that kind of stuff. I've done that in the past, take a picture of it. It pretty much lays where it wants to go, so it's not too challenging. Other than that, just making sure that when you use the tool for the cam lock and that it's going in good, you break the phasers loose, those bolts loose, and then just putting that tool down in. There's two different tools, one for the front, one for the rear. Putting those in is really easy, and once it's in, you just know it and you're like, okay, we're good to go. So you don't have to be too scared. Now it is a little technical, but you can do it. I know you can do it. I think that's pretty much it. Hopefully this video was helpful in some way. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe. See you on the next one.